Let's bring in at NBC's Julia Ainsley and Antonia Hilton, along with Krish Vignarajah, a former policy director for Michelle Obama, who now serves as the president and CEO of the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service. Good to have all of you on. Julia, you have been reporting on that friction between the Biden White House and DHS. Tell us more.
Yeah, that's right, Chris. This is according to documents we've reviewed and internal communications that shows mounting frustration. There have been a series of meetings lately between the White House and senior DHS officials where they try to come up with different solutions to what's happening on the border. The numbers across the border are rising this month. That typically happens as those summer temperatures cool down. They also have, of course, what's happening with these Republican governors trying to make political statements. But they have been presented with an option to fly migrants from overcrowded border towns into cities across the U.S., but not in a way that would sow chaos like what you're seeing in places like Martha's Vineyard, New York, D.C., and Chicago, but rather in a way that would allow federal partners to be able to receive them, shelters to know they're coming, to be able to provide them the appropriate care temporarily until they could find a relative or someone to live with before their day in immigration court. It would look much different in practice, but we know that the White House has been reluctant to do this until the numbers of border crossings get to 9,000 a day. Right now, they're around 8,000, but DHS officials think the time to plan and the time to act is now. So those two sides are really butting heads over how to deal with the rise of migrants at the border. And Chris, I have to point out that next month, a court ruling could lift Title 42. That's that COVID-19 restriction that have actually kept many migrants from being able to cross. If that lifts, they could really be looking at even more of a surge right before the November midterms.
Julia, thank you for your ongoing reporting on this crisis. Antonio, you are in New York City. 11,000 migrants have entered the shelter system there since May. The mayor says the system is at a breaking point. What are you seeing and hearing?
Well, Chris, we're outside of the new Resource Navigation Center. And what we've seen is migrants arriving throughout the entire day, and they're coming here for all kinds of resources. People tell us that they've been getting Metro cards, they've been getting IDs, connecting with lawyers, even making medical appointments here, enrolling their kids in schools while, they end up pursuing an asylum claim. And, for them, this is really not about politics. They've been describing to me taking a really dangerous and exhausting journey through Central America, making it to Texas, and then in many cases being very grateful for the bus ticket to come here to New York and to try to restart their lives. Take a listen to a conversation that I had with some folks. ¿Cómo fue la experiencia, el viaje aquí?
El viaje acá por todo Centroamérica es un viaje un trayecto muy largo, un poco difícil, pero no imposible.
¿Qué tipo de ayuda está adentro?
Acá nos ayuda a conseguir abogados, lo dan para nuestra salud, para una cita con médico, lo ayudan a sacar el ID. Mucha ayuda nos beneficiamos. Muchas orientaciones, pues.
The city's resources are understandably strained, with about 8,000 migrants currently in the shelter system here. And so Mayor Adams and other officials are taking a look at the mandate, the right to shelter here in the city. And right now, it looks that's still in place, and they're getting people to as many beds as possible. But if an end to that mandate were to come, it would mean that conditions, what the city is able to offer to migrants as they continue to arrive, likely in the thousands over the next couple weeks and months, Chris.
And Krish, as Antonia just pointed out, these are human beings who have been traveling for weeks, in some cases months. Many cases, they don't even know where they're going. A new USA Today opinion piece points out that, and I'm quoting here, dropping human beings in cities run by people you don't like isn't helping. It's just scoring points with a snarling swath of the population addicted to a steady drip of opportunistic cruelty and dehumanization. And Hillary Clinton addressed Ron DeSantis this morning.
Nobody wants open borders who has any idea of how governments and countries work, but nobody wants inhumane, terrible treatment of human beings either.
So, Krish, what can be done now to try to make sure that this crisis is handled in the most humane way possible?
It's a great question, and I think it's important to understand that each political ploy that we see creates an opportunity for us as a nation to answer this question of what is our moral and legal responsibility. You know, when we see these images, whether it's New York City or Martha's Vineyard, we're talking about people who crossed the border. They sought out U.S. officials and exercised a legal right. They were processed, documented, and they received papers for how to pursue their legal cases. And that's where it's important to understand that all they want is to be treated as human beings as opposed to cattle being herded from state to state. There's a few things the administration can do. One is to provide the federal resources that are necessary. Obviously, D.C. Mayor Bowser did request assistance from the National Guard twice, and that was rejected. Immigration is a federal issue, and it needs to have a national response. The second part is recognizing that there is infrastructure for asylum seekers. We operate in states from New Mexico to North Dakota to North Carolina that serve these asylum seekers, and there is a way in which the federal government needs to step up and coordinate the movements, because otherwise what you are going to see is more and more governors getting into this political grandstanding.
There's an argument to be made, as you know, Krish, that there is blame to go around. This is a very complicated issue. It is a fact that some states are carrying the burden more than others. But I'll also say that as long as I've been a journalist for decades, we've been talking about the desperate need for comprehensive immigration reform, and it hasn't happened. What is it going to take to get the parties to really confront these complexities and at least attempt real reform rather than scoring some short-term political points?
Maybe it's because I had a faith-based organization, but I think the honest truth is a miracle. We know that whether it's political leaders or administration officials, immigration is viewed as the third rail of American politics. And while we've seen bold action from the White House on climate crisis, inflation, infrastructure, we've seen far more reluctance to act, whether it's, you know, when we're talking about the southern border. The reason why we have so many coming through the southern border is because there is no real way to come into the U.S. You know, so many people say, well, why aren't they coming legally? Last year marked the fewest annual number of immigrants entering the U.S. since 2010. And so that's, I think, what underscores that this solution, yes, needs to be driven by the White House, but we really need to see Congress do something meaningful because they haven't done anything for 30 years. The problem is in the lead up to the midterms, I think it's next to impossible that we will see anything.
Krish O'Mara Vignarajah and Antonia Hilton, thank you both. And